Spider-Man No Way Home continues to tear through the box office on its opening weekend. We've got some fresh numbers just updated this morning from various sources, including Deadline, which we'll talk about here in just a moment, both on the domestic side and the international side. Spider-Man No Way Home is exceeding initial expectations and projections, and not by a small amount. In fact, it is crossing that $500 million global mark that I projected just a couple of days ago on the last video. If you haven't seen that one yet, check it out. There was a lot of good data in there as we got Thursday previews. We talked about this Friday before the big opening weekend came to its full climax, which is where we are now on Sunday with all the estimates in. Stay tuned. Let's get into this with Spider-Man No Way Home. Online. Well, welcome back, folks. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. Hope everybody is having a good weekend, and hopefully if you're watching this, it probably means that you were one of the gajillion people that went to go see this movie this weekend. I don't know how much left there can be to spoil at this point, since it seems like most of the folks that really were dying to get out there found a way to do it. Theaters have been adding additional screenings all weekend as ticket sales continue to sell out of the existing screenings, and the money just keeps rolling in. It's incredible. We were looking Thursday at a $50 million opening, which translated into a $120+ million opening Friday when we factored that number in. Great weekend for Spider-Man, and of course, this channel right here is where Hollywood comes to be put through the business and financial lens, and we're glad you're here. And if you're one of the 70% of folks out there that are watching this video that aren't subscribed, well, we invite you to do that today. The channel's been growing, and I can't thank you enough. Please make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, of course, the notification bell. Do share this sucker out on the social medias, and make sure you leave a comment before you check out today. Want to know your thoughts on Spider-Man, but as I said in the last video, please, I would ask the audience to be respectful. No spoilers, please, in the comments. Much appreciated. Of course, not everybody has seen this yet that wants to see it, but it sure seems like it, and I'm sure people will be going back multiple times. So let's get into the numbers here, because this is really fascinating. And this is an article that has been basically just added to, as many happen to do on Deadline as the weekends go on with these opening numbers. So I actually had to print this sucker out because it's become very long at this point, but there's a lot of new data that we have, not just box office figures, but also data from EntTelligence and PostTrack and ComScore and things like this that track audiences' reactions to these films. And we've talked about some of that with opening night Thursday. When Deadline had the Friday piece come out, there is more data today that we're going to talk about in terms of audience reaction, which, again, I think is very important to understand how this movie is going to leg out. So let's talk about some of the box office numbers first, and then we're going to talk about kind of what those mean and where I think this movie is going to wind up in terms of its entire run. Again, of course, this being a Sony picture film, a Sony distributed film. There is no day-and-date release, obviously, on a streaming service. There's no shortened window for a theatrical release. Theatrical exhibitioners, AMC, Regal, Cinemark, IMAX, Marcus Theaters, all these places, they have this movie until Sony decides otherwise. And as long as the grosses keep piling in in the way we expect them to, this is going to continue to roll up the dollars. I would say that this movie is going to be in theaters exclusively for probably somewhere in the vein of 3 months. Of course, Venom, Let There Be Carnage, the last big Sony blockbuster film to come out, came out October 1st or right about. It is still in the theaters, and here we are approaching Christmas in just a week. So that movie is going to wind up with a good 90-day theatrical run. That movie has done very well, obviously was a lead-in tacitly to this movie. Venom, Let There Be Carnage should wind up closing out the box office somewhere around $500 million in global haul. And to give you a comparison, Spider-Man No Way Home has already crossed $500 million, and it's been out officially by the count for 3 days, 5 days in some international markets. So it's absolutely a wipeout, an absolute blockbuster wipeout at the theater. And as we stated in the last video, this really puts the whole pandemic era, this is why people don't show up and all this, it puts that to rest. And we've been talking about that for months. We talked about that in the last video. Been saying for months here on this channel that Hollywood has to wake up to the fact that they have a content problem more than they have a fear of going to the movie theater problem. The streaming stuff has really hurt a lot of what would have been, in my opinion, otherwise much more successful theatrical runs for big movies, especially the ones from Warner Brothers. Of course, there's another one coming up in a couple of days with The Matrix Resurrections. We'll talk a little bit about that with all these day-and-date releases on places like HBO Max, 45-day releases with Disney Plus and things like this, or if you have Encanto, only a 30-day window for Encanto. That will be on Disney Plus for free. Just in a couple of days here on Christmas Eve, only about 30 days after it opened in theaters. So this movie puts all of those fears to bed, or it should for Hollywood. And hopefully these studios will march into 2022 going back to being committed to a more traditional pre-pandemic style theatrical release where they have a good long term of exclusivity in the exhibition houses, in the AMCs, the Regals, the Cinemarks, the IMAXs, all the ones we mentioned before. This is what Hollywood needs to get back to if they want to take these $150 million, or in the case of Spider-Man, a $200 million budgeted movie, and actually turn a good profit on it before it gets to a streaming service or a PVOD or Blu-ray or 4K disc sales, things like this. The audiences are there. They just want good content. That's it. That's it. That's all they want. And if you give them mediocre content and the opportunity to just sit and watch it at home, then that's what they're going to do. And you're not going to make money on this. So please, Hollywood, wake up and smell the coffee. Hopefully this is the strongest, blackest coffee you've ever had this weekend in terms of a wake-up call with Spider-Man No Way Home. So let's talk about some of these numbers. All right, so this is from Deadline this morning with our buddy Anthony D'Alessandro. We are always citing his articles. They're great business, financial, real dive into the data type pieces. I love what he does on Deadline. Really, nobody else does it like they do, which is why we continue to go back to this, because they give us so much data to look at, not only in box office and financial revenues, but also bringing in the research reports from EntTelligence and PostTrack and ComScore that tells us how did the audience react. And again, this is so important because this is what indicates to us, yeah, okay, a whole bunch of people went to go see a movie this weekend and it set records. But if the audience reaction to that film was less than stellar, that means the movie is probably going to have a very poor follow-up from the first weekend. That's not going to happen with this movie. We're going to talk about why. So here we are with the Sunday morning update. Sony is calling the opening weekend for Spider-Man No Way Home at $253 million. That is just domestic. That is North America. That's U.S. and Canada specifically. When we talk about domestic, a lot of people don't remember that includes the Canadian markets. This is the case with all domestic releases. In this case, $253 million, which is where we first told you it would be last night. That would be Saturday night, after we got some Saturday updates and we had the full Friday figures in, a figure that I concurred with. There was some doubt that this movie would actually break the 250 mark. And after yesterday's numbers coming in, I said, yeah, it's definitely going to be north of 250. So here we are. That is the best December opening, the best ever for Sony. Third best ever among all films, beating 2015's Star Wars The Force Awakens, which came in at just shy of $248 million domestic opening. Saturday, currently for Spider-Man, is at $73.8 million, which is in the range of where we saw it. That's the third best Saturday ever stateside. Sunday is looking at $57.35 million from 4,336 locations. And I'm going to stop right there and say, of course, the Sunday figures for the Sony film at this point are, of course, estimates. We are still in the middle of Sunday. It's noon right now as I'm recording this Central Time. So we still have a lot of Sunday to go. And when we're talking about a movie that's performing at the financial scale of Spider-Man No Way Home, again, if you talk about a plus or minus 3% margin of error in these estimates, at this scale, we're talking about several millions of dollars that could potentially push this up into the number 2 slot. We'll talk about that in just a minute in terms of all-time opening weekends, of course, unadjusted for inflation. And we do know that tickets for this movie, on average, have been coming in higher price than we've seen just from a couple of years ago. So that is something to certainly take into account, but it still doesn't take away at all from the stellar performance that we're getting from this film this weekend that is really surprising a lot of folks. Back to the article here. The sequel is $4.7 million from overtaking Avengers Infinity War's $257.698 million opening as the second best domestic opening of all time. And that's what I was talking about. That $4.7 million really is something that is, at a scale like this, is not a whole lot. In fact, if you think about $4.7 million compared to a currently projected $253 million opening weekend, you're talking about something that you're talking about 1.5% to 2% of that. So that's well within a 3% margin of error. So we could easily find out tomorrow sometime in the afternoon, maybe by Tuesday morning, once we get the exact figures in, once these are no longer estimates but actuals, that the movie could, again, given the scale, that $4.7 million is a pretty easy hurdle to overcome and get to the point where it might actually take that number 2 position away from Infinity War. And back to the article again, worldwide, Spider-Man No Way Home owns the third best global debut with $587.2 million after Avengers Endgame's $1.22 billion and Avengers Infinity War's $640.5 million, and that's without China. So if you took China out of the Infinity War stuff and really tried to compare apples to apples, Spider-Man already owns that number 2 spot. But again, we don't know at this point if Spider-Man No Way Home is going to get a China release date. That is still up for debate. It's still up in the air. It's up to the CCP. It may not. It may not get a China release date. But at this point, it's safe to say that even if it doesn't, this movie is still going to perform exceptionally well, especially when we're looking at an opening weekend already at this scale. This thing does not have to leg out well at all. It only has to leg out not even at a 2x factor from this weekend, and it's going to cross the $1 billion mark. I'm here to tell you, I think it's going to have much more than a 2x factor. It'll probably be closer to a 3x after this. I think we could be looking at a $1.5 billion total global run when this thing is all said and done. But one thing I find interesting is here in the States, box office analytics firm EntTelligence, and here comes the research data, from reports that 20 million people watched Spider-Man No Way Home this weekend. That's a huge number. That's just the domestic numbers. 20 million people went to go see this film. That's nuts. And again, you're talking about getting into these levels like we see from the big stuff, like the Infinity Wars and the Endgames. It's amazing to see one film like this do that, but it shows the power of the marketing that Sony has done, the hype, the love for the character Spider-Man that's just virtually unparalleled in the superhero universe. That's where we are now. Now, this next section I found a little humorous and good on the article for drawing the attention to this, because this really does put things into perspective. We've talked about before with the Sony-owned property of Spider-Man, at least to the film rights. They own the film rights to it at this point. But compared to the rest of the Phase 4 of the MCU that's been occurring right now from Marvel Studios itself. And again, from the article, you can say that any MCU title is a self-fulfilling box office prophecy. However, Eternals, in its Byzantine storytelling, proved that false. And I would suggest some other ones as well that came before it. And Spider-Man No Way Home, in its opening weekend, has made 1.5 times more than that movie's, The Eternals, entire domestic run, now at $163.7 million. And of course, that is after almost 6 weeks at this point, or 5 weeks, in the box office for The Eternals, which had a tremendous fall off. And again, going back to what we've talked about with some of these EntTelligence things, some of the ComScores, PostTrack, stuff like this, when you don't have great audience reaction to a film, regardless of how well the opening weekend is going to do, that kind of data can then suggest, if audience reactions are poor or less than stellar in the case of Marvel films, that you can see a precipitous drop from the first weekend into the second weekend. Again, I don't see that happening here with Spider-Man. We're going to talk about some of those numbers again in just a moment. So kind of going back to where this all started, we talked months ago about the enormous numbers that the first Spider-Man No Way Home trailer was drawing in viewership-wise globally on YouTube or different foreign markets, video sites and things like this. The combined numbers were just astonishing, and it goes back and reminds us how this all got going and the power of good marketing with a good product that you're marketing, which makes a big difference. From the article, typically when trailers are dropped in the room at CinemaCon, the general public has to wait months before seeing them. But that wasn't the case here. With a coordinated global push between all Sony departments, creative media, publicity, digital, social, the official trailer for Spider-Man No Way Home broke the 24-hour all-time record for the most global views with 355.5 million and generated the largest 24-hour social media conversation volume of all time with 4.5 million mentions and has since become the most viewed trailer of all time. Media and talent social push turned Cyber Monday into Spider Monday for the ticketing launch, making it the second best pre-sales of all time. 36% told ComScore and Screen Engine's PostTrack that the YouTube online trailer was the most influential form of marketing for No Way Home. So there you go. And those who went to see Spider-Man No Way Home this weekend told PostTrack that it was for the following reasons. The Spider-Man franchise, 56%. Marvel movie, 44%. The cast as a whole, 43%. The story, plot, 40%. Tom Holland himself, 33%. Heard it was, quote, good, 26%. Came with someone else who wanted to see it, 25%. Zendaya, 20%. And director John Watts at 12%. So a good cross-section here. To talk about more demographic information on who was going to see it Thursday and Friday, go back to the last Spider-Man video that we did after the Thursday previews came in. We had a lot of data in there that showed an amazing demographic cross-section, that this movie was not only being viewed, but adored by people of all age groups, from little kids to older adults, across all ethnic groups, across races, across everything. Latinos were very overrepresented here in seeing this film at 33% of the domestic audience. That's amazing. That really is. This movie is appealing to everyone, and it's doing it without some type of political, social agenda, modern politics push, which is great. And it goes to prove the point we've been making about the content Hollywood puts out. If you just make good movies and you don't finger wag in people's faces or try to drive a certain social or political narrative in your films to make a point, audiences will like a good story without having to feel like they're going in there to get lectured to. So this movie really fits that bill, and it's another thing that it did right. Now let's talk about some of the exhibitioners at this point, particularly with IMAX, driving 31% of this weekend's ticket sales, 62% between 18 and 34, the 34 to 44 bunch, 10% of it. IMAX alone took in 36.2 million worldwide, repping the biggest global launch for a Sony film at the IMAX theater chains, and 25% higher than Spider-Man Far From Home, which had China in the mix. And in the U.S. and Canada, IMAX, $22 million at 407 auditoriums. Biggest domestic launch for Sony, third highest IMAX domestic weekend in December, and fifth best overall. Again, astonishing. The numbers that come in for this continue to come down as just being amazing across the board. And then finally, drilling down on PostTrack demographics for this weekend, a little bit different information than we had Friday. No Way Home at 21% went to go see the movie with 2 to 4 friends. Largely, these were women and men under 25. 16% came on a date. 15% went to see the movie with one friend. And the film exceeded the expectations of 49% of the crowd, while meeting the expectations of 48%. So, it's basically everybody either had their expectations met or exceeded when they saw this film. Again, it's incredible. All this points to what we're about to get into here, talking about where I think this movie is going in terms of performance and how the legs will build out, because if this is the domestic audience, if we see similar numbers in international markets, some of which unfortunately have been delayed a month due to new restrictions and lockdowns and things like that are just taking effect this weekend. And again, as I mentioned in the last video, I encourage you to go watch the Midnight's Edge video. I believe it's on the Midnight's Edge After Dark channel, talking about some of this. Of course, one of the locations was Norway, which is where Andre from Midnight's Edge lives, and of course was upset because it's going to be a while before he gets to see the movie, unless he crosses international lines and goes somewhere else, which he might do. We'll see. Andre, hopefully you get to see it this weekend, brother. The last part of this paragraph, though, is something that's worth noting because, again, walk-up ticket sales versus pre-sales, this is always a good indicator of how traffic is being driven. Those who bought their tickets more than a weekend ago numbered 33%, while 21% bought a ticket in the past week. And again, this is why we saw so many new screenings being added to all the theatrical exhibitioners because they were selling out. The amount of tickets that were coming in on the pre-sales before the walk-up traffic, and they know they're going to get a bunch of walk-up traffic, so they keep adding screenings to satisfy these customers. We knew with the last video that on Thursday night, they had an average of about 16 screenings on Thursday previews, which was from 3 p.m. on. That's a lot of screenings per theater for a Thursday preview, a whole bunch. But 46% of people bought their tickets either the day of or the day prior. That's a big indicator of walk-up business, the juice for an over-indexing opening such as this. Absolutely. To bring that walk-up traffic in, that's what you want to do. So let's look over here where we can see on the numbers like we usually like to talk about. And again, these are still very preliminary numbers. These are early numbers. You know, we're looking at a lot of money coming in here, $587 million global opening. We figured Friday after we saw the previews from Thursday night, we would easily break $500 million this weekend. Well, it's done that. There's no question. The question is how much closer at this point to $600 million will it get, or could it potentially break the $600 million? Because again, at this scale, it looks like, $13 million away. Well, again, we're still talking about a lot of estimates in the international box office. We're still talking about Sunday estimates everywhere. These numbers are going to flesh out, and with the trend the way it's going, it's going to be trending, I think, more north than it is south at this point. So 13 million on a scale like this, you're talking about roughly 2%. 2.5%, well within a normal margin of error when it comes to analytical estimates and things like this from the box office. So don't be surprised at all if we see by Monday that this weekend number gets changed and it could break through that $600 million barrier. That being said, looking down here, production budget, $200 million. Well, that's about what we would come to expect, right? This is a big scale Marvel film, quasi-Marvel film. Again, of course, the Spider-Man character, the film rights are held by Sony, as we've mentioned before. But as we've talked about in the last video, again, please go back and watch that. A lot of good information there. Is that Sony effectively turned the production of this film over to Marvel Studios as they had in the last couple of ones. Because for those of you who don't know, Amy Pascal from Sony, or now Pascal Pictures, she's tacitly connected to Sony Pictures at this point, and Kevin Feige, of course, of Marvel Studios fame, they've been working on Spider-Man films since the Tobey Maguire days back in the early 2000s. So this is something special for Kevin, which is why he wants to stay involved in these and why he's so game to do them. And I think it works out for Sony but Marvel does have a 25% equity stake in this, Sony with the other 75%. So that is going to come on the back end when the profits break down. We'll talk about that more in a future video. But we've got a $200 million production budget. You can easily assume another $100 million in global print and advertising, global P&A. And with that, I'd say north of that. I wouldn't be surprised if we see reports of figures coming back later that the real P&A that came from Sony on this one is going to be closer to $120, maybe $140 million. We saw expenditures like that out of pocket from the distribution companies with things like Infinity War and Endgame. We're talking about a movie that's on the same kind of scale now, and they're probably going to spend another few $10, $20 million here in the next week or two to continue to pump people into the box office. Of course, they also have other marketing partners out there that are spending their own loads of cash that have tie-ins to the movie, car manufacturers and things like this. This is not uncommon. We saw this, of course, with Ghostbusters, Afterlife, with Walmart and stuff like that. So this movie is already at a position right now. Clearly, the production budget has been satiated with the opening weekend. There's no doubt. Okay, so if we're talking about if it's all in around $300 million, it's safe to say right now, after this weekend is concluded, that this movie will have already broken even in total costs, possibly be into, and I think they'll be solidly or comfortably at least into profit territory, even at $600 million right there. Because again, going back to what I always talk about, this is a traditional theatrical release. There's no day and date. There's no limited window. Sony Studios is getting the best deals from the theatrical exhibitioners right now because they're doing things the same way that they were doing them before the pandemic. They're getting the highest rental agreements, the highest revenue sharing. So when we've talked about things before, like with the Deloitte report, the accounting firm that kind of did a teardown of theatrical exhibition and streaming, a year or so ago, we know that in the first 3 weekends, especially for movies like this, the first 17 days, they're probably getting somewhere in the vicinity of 70+% of the total take. So this is doing exceptionally well. We'll be able to flesh these numbers out as time goes on, but to have an open like this, Sony is already in the black with this. Everything that comes from Monday forward is going to be virtually pure profit for them, at least in terms of the net that they take home from the theatrical exhibitioners. So we're going to keep an eye on this, but the bottom line here is this, is that if this movie legs out at about 3x, which I think is very doable at this point, there's not a whole lot to compete with this. I know Matrix Resurrections is coming out, but the fact of the matter is, there's not a whole heck of a lot of buzz around that movie, number one. And number two, it's going to be available to almost 50 million U.S. and Canadian households for free. At the same day that it drops on Wednesday, you can watch it on HBO Max. You don't even have to pay an extra penny for it. There'll be a lot of people staying home, and we'll see those numbers from Samba TV come in. We'll talk about those when they do. But I don't think Matrix is going to prove much of a threat to Spider-Man whatsoever. I think this thing is a juggernaut. And Warner Brothers, honestly, right now has probably got to be scared to death because it's going to suck all the air out of whatever they were hoping to get, from their run. But if we look at basically a 3x rundown, we're talking about a movie that is going to approach, if that happens, that will approach the $2 billion marker, which is amazing. And again, this $600 million almost this weekend is without several foreign markets, and some of them not insignificant. But it is something to where I think if those markets had been open, certainly this would have been over $600 million. They'll open up in about a month or so. Sony has pushed the release back in those markets. And again, check out the Midnight Says video if you want to go find out a little bit more about that. Now, if this thing only performs at 2x, I'd be shocked if it's that low. You're still talking about $1.2 billion. You're still talking about one of the biggest films that has come out in a long time. And again, it's just decimating this pandemic era excuse of Hollywood thinking that people just aren't going back to the movie theaters because they're too scared. It's done. That's over. That's officially over. We can move on from it. So again, let me know what you think about all this in the comments below. Great to see everybody. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, that notification bell. Do share this video out. And until next time, and we're going to be talking more Spider-Man, I'm sure next time. Take care.